Shalom, this is Sara Yoheved Rigler speaking to you from the old city of Jerusalem. And our subject today is very, very vital, a real key to any happy marriage, which is how to date your husband. So, the problems that beset marriages are many, and you know them, and that's why I think you're in the Kesher Wife Inner Circle. But no matter what the problem is, the solution is date night. Now, of course, there are varied solutions and we have many, many tools. But whenever a wife talks to me and she's telling me about, she feels so disconnected from her husband, or, they're just strangers living in the same house, or they've been married 25 years and, and they have nothing in common anymore, whatever that is, the first question I ask is, do you do date night? Because date night is the key to connecting with your husband. What is the goal of a date? The goal of a date is to bond with your husband. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean really becoming one with him on the emotional, psychological, and physical levels. And this is really the purpose of marriage, isn't it? To become one with your husband. We Jews, we're very big into oneness. We say Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. We are the people of oneness. And oneness means that God is one, which the Rambam, Maimonides, points out doesn't mean that there is one God as opposed to two or three gods. Every child knows there aren't two or three gods. But it means, when we say that God is one, we mean that our God is a God of oneness. That oneness is not numerical. This is very important to understand. Maimonides talks a lot about it. The oneness is not numerical. Oneness means unity. God is one. There is nothing else. Einod milvado. So whenever we're able to achieve oneness in this world, in this world, the physical world that we live in, this lowest of all the worlds is the physical world where we are in this lifetime. Whenever we're able to achieve oneness, we are in fact imitating God, which is of course a mitzvah of the Torah. And the relationship that has the most potential for oneness on all levels, psychologically, spiritually, intellectually, and physically, that relationship is marriage. So the goal of the date is to achieve oneness with your husband. The definition of a date is just the two of you focused on each other. Therefore, and I'm going to say a few more things about why certain things that people say. I was once, talking to a Kesher wife. She had a one-on-one appointment with me. And lo and behold, she was calling me from her car, and we were talking, on her cell phone. She was alone in the car. And I said, well, I saw there were problems in the marriage. And she said, and I said, do you do date night? And she says, yeah, I'm on my way to a date right now. We live not in the city. I'm driving into Manhattan, and we're going to go to a lecture. And I said, that is not a date. So what is not a date? A double date where you're with other people. Forget it, never. Going to a concert, lecture, movie, sports event, class, those are not dates because you are not focused on each other. Remember, the definition of a date is just the two of you focused on each other. So anything you're going to, your two of you are focusing on some third thing is not a date. Going out with family. It's very nice to go out with family. Siblings, parents, children, cousins, to see those relatives that just came into town for a couple of days, go out to dinner with them. That's great. But that's not a date. Even taking one child along makes it not a date. You have to be alone with just the two of you focused on each other. Now, if you have an infant who is nursing, you might not be able to leave that infant home. And so you might take that infant, and that is the exception to the rule, although taking a child along is not a date. If it's a nursing infant that you have to take, you can take that infant because the nursing infants tend to sleep a lot. So hopefully you won't have to spend a lot of focus on the baby. How frequently should you be going out on a date? Ideally, one night a week should be devoted to date night. It should become your date night. For me and my husband, Wednesday night is date night. Now, sometimes things come up on Wednesday night, and so we don't have a date night, but the minimum frequency for date night should be twice a month. Once a week, ideally, but at least twice a month. So how do you find time for date night? Time is a big problem in everybody's lives. We're all too busy, not just very busy, but too busy. And so there's the problem of the husband who doesn't have time, and there's a problem of a wife who doesn't have time. Now, if the problem is that the husband doesn't have time, many times women will say to me, oh, my husband doesn't have time for date night. He works all the time, or he's never home. And when I suggest date night, they think, well, he's not going to be willing to take the time. But the truth is that husbands who are never home is a symptom already of something seriously in trouble in the marriage. Unless, there are times of life when, like you have a big debt, you have to pay it off, your husband takes, is moonlighting to pay it off, and that hopefully is a temporary period. But what happens often in marriage, and this was the very start of my Kesher Wife workshop, what happens often in marriage is that husbands avoid being home because they avoid their wives because the wives are so critical and nobody wants to be criticized. So but my whole thing with my marriage workshop started when I was at a wedding, sitting next to a woman who I didn't know, but we started to talk. And she told me that after 24 years of marriage, she had just received her get, her Jewish divorce, a few days before. And it was very traumatic for their 5 children, and just, she obviously looked very, very distraught. And I asked her what had gone wrong in her marriage. Did they fight all the time? And she replied that no, they rarely fought, but that her husband was gone all the time. He would go hang gliding in the Golan Heights. We're having this conversation somewhere in Israel. He would go hang gliding in the Golan Heights, and he'd rush into the house a half an hour before Shabbos. And this conversation led me to start wondering why a husband would enjoy hang gliding more than being with his wife. And my research revealed that a major cause of husbands escaping their wives is what you now know as the 3 sins: criticizing, correcting, and controlling. And even very nice, kind women, and I'm sure all of you are, even very nice, kind women sometimes or often fall into the behavior pattern of the 3 sins: criticizing or correcting or controlling their husbands. And we don't even realize that we're doing it because it was, a mild criticism, a little correction. But those criticisms and corrections, however mild, however nicely spoken, whatever, even a soft tone of voice, they take their toll on your husband's self-esteem and they drive them away. So if you say, no, my husband doesn't want to go out on a date, he doesn't have time, it could be because your husband is afraid of spending time with you. He's afraid of spending time with you because often spending time with you means you're pointing out to him, his failings and his deficiencies. So since we started the whole Kesher Wife workshop many webinars ago with not committing to 3 sins, by now I hope you are doing it. And if you're not doing it, please reprint out that the handout, the chart that went with that first part of the workshop, the 3 sins, and start charting and rewarding the body. Whenever a wife tells me, like, she started, but it didn't, she stopped with refraining from the 3 sins, I know it's because she stopped charting and rewarding the body. If you reward your body, this is the Musar Masters. This isn't Sara Rigler. This is the Musar Masters tell us. This is the way to do it. Chart and reward the body. You have to reward the body. If you don't reward the body, you're going to end up either just discontinuing the exercise or resenting Well, why should I be the one, to stop criticizing him? He's still criticizing me. Charting and rewarding the body. That's the way to stop committing the three sins. And then your husband will want to be with you. He'll want to carve out time to be with you. One of our Kesher wives is married to a congregational rabbi, and she told me that her husband just, didn't have time to go out. There's probably nobody busier than a congregational rabbi because he has just so many obligations to his congregants, right? And she said, in addition to that, her husband had no time. There was no place for them to go because there were many kosher restaurants in their city. But if her husband she and her husband went out to a kosher restaurant for dinner, they'd be besieged by his congregants who would be there. It was a small city, and they'd be, his congregants would be there and start talking to him and asking him questions. So that was not a place to go because remember, being alone is very important on a date. So I suggested they go for a walk in the park. And she reluctantly agreed. And next time I spoke to her, her voice was full of surprise because her husband, he had agreed to go on the date to the park, and they'd walked, and he had really enjoyed it, much to his surprise as well as her surprise. And the following week, he, on his own initiative, suggested that they go out on another date. So if you can get your husband to go out on one date and he likes it and it's good for him, he will find the time to go out on a second date. Now sometimes it's the wife who complains that she has no time because all of us we are so busy. There are our jobs, all the things we have to do at home, children, elderly parents, whatever it is. We are too busy. And here I have to remind you that the motto, we have many mottos in the Kesherite Inner Circle, but one of our key mottos is, my marriage is the most important thing in my life. So you have to give it priority. There's no such thing as I don't have time to go out with my husband. Look at what else you are doing with your day and with your hours and decide that my husband and my marriage takes priority over this Hesed project. Even over doing homework with a child, even over, you might be trying to earn money on the side with doing, some kind of a little, whatever it is. Your marriage has to take priority. Okay. The next question is where to go on a date. I suggest very strongly that you try to leave your house because the walls of your house are always going to be calling out to you with what you should be doing. So if you live in a place that has nice kosher restaurants and you have the money to go out for dinner, that's ideal. Good food always arouses positive associations. If you can even only afford to go out for dessert or for coffee, that's also fine. It's good to eat together on a date. But if a restaurant's not an option because there are no nice kosher restaurants in your town, then you could go for a walk in the botanical gardens or a park or along the local beach or the riverside. Being out in nature relaxes people. So in addition to being out of the house, it's very nice if you can be in nature. Or especially when you choose a restaurant, if you have a really choice of many kosher restaurants in your city, choose one also that has conducive atmosphere where you will relax, where the lights are a little low. So choose a good atmosphere. If going out is not an option because you can't afford a babysitter, or it's not safe to walk in the park at night where you live, then you can have a very nice date at home. It's second best, but you could do it. You wait until the children are asleep, and then you create a conducive atmosphere. You turn down the lights, you light candles, you play soft music, you serve a special dinner or dessert, a glass of wine. You could date in the house, but again, it's not optimum, but there are times of life where, let's say, you can't get a babysitter and you have to. Okay. The rules of the date. Very, very, very important. No talking about business, finances, children. Oh, why do I have finances twice? Problems. This should say problems. Number 4 should be problems. I don't know how that worked out. Okay, no talking about business, finances, children, or problems. The reason why not to talk about this is because then your date becomes a business meeting. Let's remember that the purpose of a date is to bond with your husband. You don't bond with your husband by talking about problems or his business or your business or your finances, which is really like a total turn off, or even the children. Now, people will say to me, well, if I don't talk on the date, if I don't talk about what's going on with our children on the date, when will I ever talk to my husband about, the problems with the children? You have to take time before the date to do that. So you can do it, you can say, okay, we're going to allocate 15 minutes before the date. Okay, the children are asleep, the babysitter is here, but we're going to sit out on the porch, or we're going to go sit in the car, and for 15 minutes before the date starts, we will talk about what I've been waiting to talk to you about with the problems with the children. Okay, allocate to, or don't attach it to the date at all. On your date night is Wednesday night, but on Monday nights at 10 o'clock, you spend a half an hour dealing with your problems, or your businesses, or your finances, or your children. If the exceptions to this rule, what I mean by don't talk about, business, let's say, is you can talk about you or your husband's feelings. Dates are wonderful times to talk about feelings. So I'm going to give you an example of the difference. If you say, your husband says to you, my boss wants me to work extra hours, how should I tell him no? That's talking about his business, and you're looking for a solution. And that is not what a date is about. On the other hand, if your husband says, my boss wants me to work extra hours, I feel worried, really scared whenever I oppose him, okay, then you're talking about feelings. Then it's not a question of how do I say no to the boss. It's how do I deal with my feelings of I can't stand up to my boss. And that could be you as well as your husband, since you're the one who's going to probably be initiating the subjects which we will say that you are supposed to talk about. Then you can be you. It's your business. My boss wants me to work extra hours. How should I tell him no? Which is not to be talked about on a date. You'll do that on Monday night. As opposed to my boss wants me to work extra hours and I feel worried whenever I oppose him. Let's talk about your feelings. A date is not a time to problem solve about the children, but it's a great time to talk about your feelings about your children. So note the difference between, you say to your husband, what are we going to do about Danny's problems in school? No, that's not what a date is for. You're supposed to be focusing on each other, not on the children. On the other hand, if you say on a date, Danny's problems in school make me feel guilty about my parenting. Maybe I didn't give him enough quality time. I wish I'd been more attentive to him. You're not talking about your child. You're talking about your feelings. And feelings, as you'll see, is one of the things that you can talk about on a date. Don't talk about things that require solutions. Because when you sit together to have a problem-solving session, that is not a date. That's very important in marriage, but it's not a date because you're not focused on each other. Another example would be, let's say you're having problems in your relationship with your brother and your sister-in-law. On a date, you don't say, I don't know how to handle, my brother and sister-in-law when they come over for a holiday. She's so critical and he's so non-communicative. That's taking focus off of each other, and it doesn't belong on a date, although you do have to talk about it. Talk about it on a different night. But maybe you could talk about your feelings. So you could say to your husband, when my brother and sister-in-law come over for a holiday, I feel so inadequate. Like our house is never furnished stylily enough and our children never behave well enough. How do I handle my feelings? See, that's very different. You're talking about yourself and your feelings. In general, the rule is the only subjects that you should be talking about on a date are you and your husband, and things about you and your husband, about your feelings, about your things, about your we'll get to it. I shouldn't skip ahead, okay? But this is the first thing that you really, you'll find that most couples, I'm sure, for however long you've been married, when you go out on a so-called date, you end up talking about business, finances, children, and problems, and that's not a date in the Kesher wife dictionary. Okay, the definition of a date is just the two of you focused on each other. Business meetings are important. They do not constitute a date. I have a beautiful story to share with you that I think of whenever I think about this subject. I knew a woman in Mea Sharim. They were told are in Hasidim. Those are the Hasidim that, if you've ever been to Jerusalem or to Mea Sharim, you see these women with, black, very tight black kerchiefs and black shawls and black stockings. Very, very firm people. So this woman, she was originally from Canada, and they came to Israel many years ago. They have 10 children, and she told me that, these are not, people in Todah Zara and Hasidus do not go out on dates to restaurants. That does not ever happen. But every single morning except Shabbat, her husband would come home from davening, and he'd bring her a flower, one flower that he got somewhere, and he'd give her the flower, and they would have breakfast together. And that was their date, and it was every morning. And the way they would start, and the timing was timed so that most of the kids were out at school, and if the baby would be sleeping, and they would start with her husband saying, "Okay, now, what errands do you want me to run? What things do you want me to fix in the house? What are the problems? You need to have a notebook and a pen," and he would write down whatever she would say. They would talk about the problems, and they would do their business. Then he would put aside, when that was finished, he would put aside the pad of paper and the pen, and their date would start. And the date was just having breakfast together, just the two of them focused on each other. How romantic can you be in a kitchen in Mea Sharim? Apparently very romantic. They had a wonderful marriage. I speak in the past tense because he died of cancer a few years ago in his 50s. It's very sad. But while he lived, they had such a wonderful marriage. And every morning they had a date like that. And she told me that the morning after her oldest daughter got engaged, got engaged, and there was all the excitement, and she and her husband, her name is Shana, they were having their date at breakfast, and the daughter interrupted to ask something about the engagement, or what they should get for the chassan or something, and Shana said to her, the kids knew, that this was sacrosanct, this time that Mommy and Tati had together. She said, Tati and I are having breakfast together. You're not allowed to talk to us. And she said, but I just got engaged, with my husband, blah, 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 blah. And Shana said to her, Tati is my chassan. So even for something as important as her daughter's engagement, nothing could violate the sacred space of them spending time, just the two of them together, focused on each other, over breakfast in a kitchen in Mea Sharim. Okay, now we get to the prayer before the date. Because, as we said from the very beginning of the Kesher Wife workshop, your marriage has three participants: you, your husband, and Hashem. And if Hashem is not in the picture, there's something very wrong with the picture. So you have to bring Hashem into every situation. If you're going shopping for a new outfit, pray to Hashem that you find the right outfit and the right color and the right size, and that it fits you and looks good on you, and that it lasts a long time, and it's the right price that you can afford. Pray to Hashem before you do everything. The Midrash says that you should pray to Hashem even for a shoelace. There's nothing too small for prayer, and there's nothing too big for prayer. So before you go on a date, bring the sanctity of your relationship with Hashem into the picture, recognizing that, many things can determine whether a date is successful. Like you can decide that you're going to a certain restaurant and there can be a long line, and by the, and by the time you get to your table, you're both exhausted, or you could have, there's a story, one of our Kesher wives says that was one of her victory stories, was that she was always resentful that she always had to plan the dates. Her husband never planned the dates, and this bothered her. They had date night once a week, but she was the one who always had to plan where they would go, what they would do. So one week, and she told her husband that she wanted him to plan one time. So one time he planned, and they were going to go to a certain restaurant that wasn't so close away. It was like a 40-minute drive away, but it was worth going to. And he had called to make sure the address and everything like that, and he was very proud of himself that he had planned this. And they drove the 40 minutes and parked the car and went to the restaurant, and it was closed. For whatever reason, it was closed. And it was a really big victory for her to not get annoyed with him, like, you can never plan anything right, you're always messing up things. I mean, they ended up going someplace else, and they had a very good time because she refrained from the 3 sins. Because she didn't criticize him that, well, why didn't you, when you called for directions, why didn't you make sure that they're open tonight? She didn't criticize him. They had a very nice time. But many factors can determine whether a date is successful or not, so you always need Hashem's blessing on every date. So the prayer before a date is, my loving and beloved God, you have blessed me with the tremendous blessing of being married. You have united me with my precious husband, soulmate, and partner. He is my spiritual partner, as well as my partner in all the many aspects of my life, domestic, child-rearing, financial, social, and physical. Tonight we have set aside time to bond. Please bless that endeavor. Remove all the psychological and emotional blockages that stand in the way of our total oneness. Please open my husband's heart to receive my love and understanding. Please open my heart to love and accept my husband in his totality, including his faults and limitations. I know that if he could press a button to eliminate his flaws and fears, his inner obstacles and obstinacies, he would press that button. But only you, Hashem, can relieve him and me of our limitations. Please bless our date tonight. Surround us with your light, love, peace, and divine presence. May your Shekhinah, the divine presence, dwell between us, and may we achieve total oneness, which creates oneness in all the worlds. So Jewish workshops should be sending out to you with this recording. They should be sending out to you this prayer to say before a date. So you say that before you even leave the house. So now we're at what to talk about on a date. Now you know what you're not allowed to talk about. Business, finance, children, and problems. What can you talk about? So many wives say, well, if we don't talk about those things, there's nothing left to talk about, and that's not true. And I think Jewish workshops also sent you this little booklet, this full color booklet that they printed of questions to ask on a date. Both questions, my questions, and questions from some other source. You should have that little booklet, but I want to go over with you the 3 general categories that I suggest on a date. So the 3 categories of conversation on a date are, first of all, imaginative questions. We're all of us are so caught in our workaday lives. We all have problems, we all have tensions, we all, we're all like under this burden. So one way to just fly above our workaday lives is to go into the realm of the imagination. So these kind of imaginative questions will enable you to see a deeper and perhaps more whimsical side of your husband, and you may be surprised by his answers. I know I had been married 28 years or something when I asked my husband these questions, and I was really surprised by his answer, and I thought I knew him so well. But so here are some possible imaginative questions. Obviously, you don't ask just one question after another. One question, you should be able to be like 10 minutes of conversation at least. So first question might be, if you won the lottery and you had $50 million, what would you do with the money? What your husband answers will tell you a lot about your husband that you might not have been aware of. Another imaginative question. If you could travel anywhere in the world and money is no object, where would you go? How would you get there? When I asked my husband that, he said he would take a hot air balloon. It was something, he felt that was like very fun and romantic, a hot air balloon. Okay. Travel anywhere in the world, where would you go and how would you get there? Money is no object. Another question might be, if you could be any age right now for a few months, which age would you pick? These are just fun, whimsical things. These aren't going to happen. I mean, you may win the lottery, it's unlikely. But these are just whimsical things that just thinking about them relaxes us, takes us out of our workaday world and our problems. Another question could be, if you could be any profession, like all the training and education is automatically uploaded to your brain, which profession would you choose? This will reveal a lot about your husband. Let's say your husband is a computer programmer. And you ask him that question, if you could choose any profession, like you have all the knowledge, all the training, all the skill immediately, which profession would you choose? He might say something very different than computer programming. And that might really be a deep window into his soul. What would he do if he could be anything? Another question could be, if we could live anywhere in the world, where would you live? Okay, I mean, you live where you live for very good reasons. Maybe that's where you both grew up. Maybe that's where your job or your husband's job is. Maybe that's where, you own a house and whatever it worked out that's, the neighborhood you live in. But if you could live anywhere, you don't have to worry about house prices or, having to be near elderly parents or near, your children, your married children. If you could live anywhere, just like, don't be limited by reality. That's what's great about imaginative questions. You could live anywhere in the world. Where would you live? Another question is, build your dream house. What would it look like? Would it be on the side of a cliff and the ocean with one whole side glass so you can see the ocean all the time? We have friends. Before he became religious, he built his dream house. It was in upstate New York. And he bought an old mill that had literally had a river running through it because it worked the mill. And he got this architect who became subsequently a famous architect, but then was just a young guy. He got this architect to design the house and redid the mill until he had this house with a waterfall running through the house. And it was really beautiful. And it was really his dream house. And he had many guests there. He told us all about it. He really loved it. And then fortunately, he became religious, and the house was not in walking distance of a shul. So eventually, he sold the house. It was before he was married. Eventually, in fact, he moved to Israel. He came to Israel, met somebody here, got married here, and they went back and sold the house. Which is better to live in Jerusalem than to live even in a dream house. But anyway, ask your husband, build your dream house. What would it look like? Another question is, if you could change one choice you made in your life, what choice would it be? Could be a choice about career. Could be a choice about ending a relationship with a sibling. Could be a choice about something he once said to his parents. Could be a choice about what he majored in college, or which college he went to, or which college he didn't go to. You could change one choice in your life. What choice would it be? So those are imaginative questions, and of course you can imagine many more imaginative questions. Another category of conversation on a date that enables you to get to know each other better is historic questions. So some possible historic questions. And by the way, these work even, See, most of us wives feel like, oh, I know my husband. I know him through and through. Yes, I know what it was like when he was growing up. Yes, he's told me so much. The truth is, we have to get this idea out of our heads. Our husbands have depths that we have no idea of. So some historical questions could be, what was your bar mitzvah like? Did you enjoy it? Who came? I mean, how many of you really know whether your husband enjoyed his bar mitzvah? Or what has been the best year of our marriage for you? Hopefully, don't ask what's been the worst year of our marriage. Then you'll just get on negative things. Just keep it positive. What has been the best year of our marriage for you? Or a question that will go deeper, which is, what was the most challenging period of your growing up years? And when he talks about that, and so that might be hard for him to talk about. If he doesn't want to talk about it, don't press it. Our husbands all have different personalities. Some personalities don't want to go back and revisit the past because it was too painful. So let it go. But if he's open to it, another question could be, if you could go back and change one thing in your relationship with your father, let's say his father's deceased. If you could go back and change one thing in your relationship with your father, what would you change? Or if his mother is deceased, if you could go back and change something in your relationship with your mother, what would you change? These are things that he's going to have to think about before he answers. But it's a way of getting below the surface and really getting to know a deeper side of your husband. Another question would be, who was your best friend in high school? And what's the most fun thing you ever did with him? Another question would be, who was your favorite teacher in school and why? Or who was your favorite aunt or your favorite uncle and why? Or what's been the happiest experience of your life? It's good to reflect on happy experiences. It might surprise you, his answer. Also, you could ask, what was the most frightening experience of your life? Even though that's we don't have to keep it always positive. It could be something negative, but just don't open the door to start talking about problems in your marriage. That's all I'm saying. You can go to things that have a negative tint to them, but don't start discussing problems in your marriage. That's not the purpose of the date. Okay. Next category is feeling questions. And again, if you have a husband that doesn't want to talk about his feelings, don't push it. But feeling questions open up the fathomless world of your husband's psyche. I mean, you know a lot about your husband, especially if you've been married a long time. But do you know how he feels about this or that? You know what he does. Do you know about how he feels about what he does? Many women complain about being bored by their husbands. One of our mottos is, there are no boring husbands, only wives who do not know how to penetrate into their husband's fascinating depths. If you're bored by your husband, it means you don't know him well enough. He may not know himself well enough, especially if he never talks about his feelings and doesn't want to talk about his feelings. But sometimes there's an opening, like you're at this nice restaurant, you've had a good meal, you've had a glass of wine, you're relaxed. So maybe under those circumstances, he would be open to talking about feelings. Again, try it, but don't push it. So some possible feeling questions would be, how do you feel? And fill in the blank about an upcoming event. Our daughter's upcoming wedding, our son's bar mitzvah, your 50th birthday, your parents' 60th anniversary, whatever it is. How do you feel about that? Another question is, how do you feel about what happened at the Shabbos table last week? Something happened, let's say, at the Shabbos table. It was a skirmish with, let's say, a guest or a child. How do you feel about it? We're not problem solving, but how do you feel about what happened? How do you feel about your best friend's divorce? These are things like you might talk about the divorce. Oh, it's so unfortunate, blah, 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 blah. How does your husband feel about it? How do you feel about my upcoming surgery? Right? There's so many things to work out with you with the surgery coming up. The doctor and the cost and the insurance and the this and the that. What about your feelings? I'll tell you a story that's really amazing. I mean, amazing in this area of talking about feelings. My husband and I were on a date, and I had a mammogram, a routine mammogram. Sure, I mean, I knew for sure I couldn't have breast cancer because I did all the right things. I ate all the right kinds of vegetables, and I didn't use underarm deodorants that have aluminum, and I don't make cancer in my family, and I'm not, I'm the type A type that has more prone to heart condition than cancer. Certainly I didn't have cancer, but I did this mammogram, and the doctor wanted to do also a biopsy. And he said he'd give me the results in a week, and I should come back in a week, and not on the phone. I would not, they don't give results of biopsies on the telephone. Okay, so I don't know why all this whole thing, because I was sure I couldn't have breast cancer, but my husband was supposed to go. We live in Israel. My husband was supposed to go to Toronto to meet with A.B. Ruttenberg. He was doing a music project. My husband is a musical arranger, and he was arranging, I think, Deveka 6, the album Deveka 6, and he had to meet personally with A.B. Ruttenberg, the very successful musician who's composed so many wonderful songs. And it was all scheduled that he was going to go. First, he was going to go to, as long as he was flying to America, he was going to go visit his mother first and then fly to Toronto to visit A.B. Ruttenberg. And he was leaving, I think, on Monday, and I was supposed to go back, get my results from the biopsy on a Wednesday. So we were on a date. This was the previous Thursday night. He was leaving maybe he was leaving Motzei Shabbos, I don't remember. And we decided we started to talk about how do I feel about him not being here when the biopsy results come in. Now, we had already decided that on Wednesday, when I was going to get my results, and I was going to go with my friend would go with me, that I'd call him. He'd be at his mother's house in Los Angeles, and I would call him, when it would be morning in Los Angeles, and I would tell him, and it was all set. But when we started to talk about how did I feel about him not being away, but not being with me, and I went in for the biopsy results, I realized I didn't feel good about it. I mean, the plans were all made. He had the ticket and everything. It was Thursday night. But only because we sat down and we had this opportunity to really talk about feelings did I become aware of my own feelings. I wasn't aware of my own feelings until we devoted time to focusing on what were my feelings. My feelings were, deep down, that I wanted him with me. Although I was sure I didn't have cancer, I wanted my husband with me for the biopsy results. That was my feeling. And he immediately changed his plane ticket and to leave the following week. And he went with me for the biopsy results on Wednesday. And sure enough, I got the diagnosis of breast cancer. This was 14 years ago. I can't begin to imagine had I gone without my husband for those results. But we just don't take time in our busy, busy lives where there's so many arrangements to be made. He's leaving, there's the ticket, there's the packing, there's this, that. What about feelings? We don't take time to focus on feelings. So that was a biggie. That I was able to contact my feelings about him going, and we were in a situation where we were talking about my feelings, and I was able to express my feelings, and he was able to hear that these were my feelings, and he was able to change his plans. He did change his plans because he understood that how important it was to respond to my feelings. So there are feelings about many things. Again, we get so caught up in the arrangements of things that we rarely talk about the feelings. But how do you feel about our moving to a different town? How do you feel about our expecting another child? How do you feel about your new boss? How do you feel about being out of work? So many kasher wives complain that their husbands are out of work for one reason or another, and they waste time. How about asking your husband, again, on a date, not in a confrontational way, but you're on a date, in a very relaxed atmosphere. You've eaten a meal, you had a glass of wine, you're relating, you're loving each other, you're connecting, and ask your husband, how do you feel about being out of work? You might be very surprised to realize that he feels worse about being out of work than you feel about him being out of work. So feeling questions are really, really important. And so let's say your husband doesn't like to talk about his feelings. Does that mean you can't talk about your feelings? Not at all. You can talk about your feelings. You can say, you know, you know, I know I'm going to be retiring at the end of this year. You know, I'd like to share my feelings about how I feel about retirement. Or, you know, well, we're expecting, you know, in another month, and it's very exciting and everything, but I'd really like to share with you, you know, my apprehensions about becoming a mother. You know, feelings. So if your husband is, and we did your husband's world, and let's say that you are a feeling type and your husband's a thinking type. So not only he's not in touch with his own feelings, but he doesn't really understand your feelings. So don't look to him for deep empathy, but you should be able to express to your husband your feelings without going on and on and on about it until it drives him crazy. But again, the proper atmosphere on a date where you're bonding, where you've listened to him, where you've practiced active listening to what he wants to talk about, and you brought your little book of questions, and you start to talk to him about your feelings. Hopefully he's willing to listen, even if he's not the type of person. You know, empathy is a feminine attribute. It's called bina in Hebrew. So women were endowed with bina, empathy. Men were not. So you don't have great expectations of your husband really empathizing with your feelings, but you should be able to feel free to express your feelings to your husband in the right time, the right place, which is the date. Now, I want to mention that when the words I feel are followed by the word that, then you are not expressing a feeling at all. You're expressing a thought or an opinion. For example, I feel that my mother's forgetfulness is just a normal sign of aging. That's not a feeling. That's an opinion. That's a thought. I feel that my mother's forgetfulness is that. There's no feeling there. Whereas if you say, I feel worried whenever my mother forgets, it scares me that she's declining, that's a feeling. In other words, the words I feel cannot be followed by the word that, or what you're expressing is not a feeling. And that's a general rule. Another example, I feel that my new boss is tyrannical and unfair. That's not a feeling. That's a judgment. Contrast that with saying, I feel intimidated and put down by my new boss. Now that's a feeling. Okay, so beware of that. Beware, we use the word I feel a lot, and we don't express a feeling at all if it's followed by the word that. So a common question from wives is, what if I ask my husband all these questions, imaginative questions, historical questions, feeling questions, but he never asked me any questions in return? Then you have two alternatives. You can give an answer without his asking. For example, after he's told you what he would do if he won the lottery, you can chime in with, that's so interesting, I would blah, 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 blah. Okay, so you don't have to wait for him to ask you. You can just volunteer it. Or another option is be happy that your husband is answering your questions and talking about himself. You know, I've said many times, this is from the Gemara, from the Talmud. It says that 10 parts of speech came down into the world, and 9 parts of those 10 were given to women. So your husband is probably not a great communicator. And especially where his feelings or his deepest aspirations are concerned, he probably doesn't communicate a lot. So here you are on a date, and you're asking questions, and he's answering. But he's not asking you any questions. Be happy, he's answering. This is a precious opportunity to get to know him better and deeper. A date should end with wine and intimacy. A glass of wine and intimacy. Wine to relax us, and intimacy, when it is permitted, of course. If you're, according to the laws of family purity, if you're in nida and it's not permitted, then you can have a date without intimacy. Okay, but when it's permitted, you should have intimacy. Now, I believe that you have received our book, the Jewish couples book on intimacy, or Jewish couples marriage book, or whatever it is. I think it's an intimacy book, where there's sources from the sages, both the sages going back as far as the Talmudic sages to contemporary sages about intimacy, and we have a whole series on the Kesher wife in the bedroom, which is very important to listen to. Intimacy is a very important part of a Jewish marriage. Judaism is the one only religion that says that the high road to God is marriage. All the other religions say the high road to God is celibacy. Christianity says that, Buddhism says that, Hinduism says that. We're the only ones who say, no, the high road to God is through marriage. And marriage includes physical intimacy, because Judaism is the religion of bringing godliness, bringing the presence of God into the physical world. It's not just we want to be elevated. We want to draw down the presence of God into the physical world. And we do that more than in anything else we do. We do that every time we do a mitzvah. But more than anything, we do it with marital intimacy that is done the proper way, with the laws of family purity, and with the right intention, and the right consciousness. And this is not our subject for today. So I refer you to the Kesher wife in the bedroom to hear more about that. But once you've attained through your date this emotional bonding, emotional and psychological bonding with your husband, it should lead to physical bonding. That would be the destination. That everything comes before should lead to the great destination of physical intimacy. So I hope that all of you will really take this seriously. This is not something you're going to be charting or rewarding the body. The date itself is a reward for the body. And I hope you'll all be starting to do date night. It is vitally important for your marriage to do date night at least twice a month, ideally every week. And that concludes our webinar on how to date your husband. And I bless you that you should really attain greater and greater depths of bonding with your husband through dating him the proper way.